So, as we said before, one of the themes of this course is storytelling with data. And in the previous session, we saw 3 examples of using data and data visualizations to tell stories. As you may know, Tableau explicitly supports stories. And if you go to help.tableau.com, current pro, desktop, and US story best practices, you'll see more examples of stories being told in Tableau, as well as a classification of stories. And obviously the Canvas page contains this link. But it raises the broader questions about what are some of the techniques you could use and lessons you may want to bear in mind as you start using your data to tell your stories. So at the end of the session, you should be able to discuss the importance of context for creating effective visualizations, explain what pre-attentive attributes are and how they can be used to focus an audience's attention, discuss the importance of thinking like a designer in creating data visualizations to tell a story, and explain why telling stories with data is in many cases more effective than just presenting the data. The lecture is very much based on this book by Cole Nussbauer Knaflik, Storytelling with Data, a data visualization guide for business professionals. The syllabus contains the details about the book. It's one of the recommended books for this course. And I recommend that you read it. It's an easy read, and it contains many more examples than we could cover in this fairly brief lecture. The book contains 6 lessons, some of which we'll talk about right now. So the first one is the importance of context. The second one concerns choosing an effective visualization. The third one points out that clutter is your enemy. The fourth one is about focusing your audience's attention. The fifth one is about thinking like a designer. And the sixth one is about the importance of telling a story. So let's start with the importance of context. So the book starts with a distinction between exploratory and explanatory analysis. Exploratory analysis is the analysis of the data to discover what is important and should be communicated. Explanatory analysis is the communication of those highlights that you discovered through an exploratory analysis to an audience. Now, when we make a presentation, many of us, me included, have the tendency to focus more on the exploratory part of the analysis than the explanatory part of the analysis. We want to talk about what we did to discover those highlights. Well, resist that temptation. The audience is in general not interested in what you did to discover those highlights. It is important in those highlights, and those highlights have to be communicated. So, in order to start an effective explanatory analysis, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. Who is your audience? What does your audience need to know? And what do you want your audience to do once they have the relevant information? So again, because this is maybe the most important part, the most important lesson, to start an effective explanatory analysis, ask who is your audience? What do they need to know? And what do you want your audience to do once they have the relevant information? And you should only start thinking about visualizations once you have answered these 3 questions. The second lesson is about choosing an effective visualization. And sometimes, depending on the message you want to get across, depending on what you want your audience to know, the best visualization may not be a visualization at all, but maybe a simple number. Suppose that I've discovered through an analysis of enrollment data for the MS-BAIS that 32% of students in the program take the data visualization course. Well, the best way to communicate that is to simply have the number 32 and no other visualization. However, in many cases, the best way to communicate the message is through some visualization of some kind. And we'll talk about choosing an appropriate visualization in the next session, where we'll look at some additional material as well. The third lesson is about clutter being your enemy. you want to make sure that your audience's attention doesn't get distracted by unnecessary elements in a visualization. So present only the information that your audience needs to know and make the visualization as uncluttered as possible. So here's an example of a cluttered visualization. First of all, notice that the y-axis has digits. It's about mapping the number of graduate student applications received versus the number of student applications, graduate student applications we've processed. First of all, notice that the y-axis contains numbers behind the decimal point, digits behind the decimal point. Well, clearly that's not necessary. Second, notice that because I used the full name of the months are displayed in with a different orientation. They are slanted, and that almost draws your attention whether you want it or not. There are also horizontal lines in the visualization that really don't add anything to the message I want to convey. And finally, because I have a separate legend at the bottom, I need to switch my attention a couple of times between the line and the legend in order to understand that the blue line represents the number of student applications received, and the orange line represents the number of student applications processed. See what happens when we declutter it. So what I've done now is I've simply removed the digits behind the decimal point from the y-axis. I have replaced the full names of the months by standardly used abbreviations so that they are now no longer oriented in a different way. And finally, I moved the labels onto the lines, so I no longer have a separate legend. Compare the two and see which one is cleaner, which one conveys the message more effectively, the cluttered one on the left or the uncluttered one on the right. The fourth lesson is about focusing your audience's attention, and it's in a way related to the decluttering message. The idea here is to use pre-attentive attributes to focus your audience's attention on those aspects of the visualization that are most important. And pre-attentive attributes are those attributes you notice without any conscious effort. You can find more information about pre-attentive attributes at Interactive Design Foundation, the Coursera course on data visualization, and Megan Longoria's page at Data Savvy. And again, the Canvas page contains the actual links to these 3 pages. So here is an example of the power of pre-attentive attributes. This is derived from the Coursera course. Look at this square of digits and figure out how many 3s there are. Right? It's not obvious. It will take you a little while to find the answer. Now, look at this one. Same numbers in the same square, but what I've done now is I've used pre-attentive features to draw attention to the 3s in this square of numbers. I have changed the orientation by italicizing them. I have underlined them, and I've made them bold. So answering the question how many 3s there are is very simple for the square of numbers at the bottom, and fairly complicated for the square of numbers at the top. So the most important pre-attentive attributes for our purposes, for the purpose of data visualization, are color, form, which includes orientation, line length or width, size, shape, added mark, spatial grouping, spatial positioning, and movement. And we've already encountered the orientation pre-attentive attribute when we decluttered the graduate applications graph and replaced the full name of the month by an abbreviation so that it no longer had a different orientation. So here are some more examples of how you can use pre-attentive attributes. All of these visualizations, next 5 or so visualizations we're going to look at, were created from the same set of data. If you look at this bar chart, then the first thing that will jump out at you is that one line is considerably longer than any of the others. You may then want to look at the left, at the y-axis, to see that it's October. So your attention gets drawn through the pre-attentive attribute line length or size to one particular line, and then using attention, using conscious effort, you look at the y-axis and you discover it's October. Now, I can add emphasis to the October line by either changing the color, as I did on the left, or by adding a mark, as I did on the right. In both cases, I pull the audience's attention even more to the October data. Or it may be the case that I'm not interested in October at all, that the message I want to convey concerns the sales in March, April, and May. Well, if that's the case, I can draw attention to these 3 months by changing the color of those months. So if you look at this one now, then it probably is the case that your attention gets drawn more to March, April, and May than it does to October. You can also really badly use color, as in this one, which to me is completely confusing. I would have no idea what anybody could be trying to communicate if they use colors in this way. So the idea then is that you use pre-attentive attributes to draw attention to those aspects of the visualization that are relevant to the message you want to communicate to the audience. And this obviously goes back to lesson 1, the importance of context. Who are you communicating to? What you would want to communicate? And what do you want your audience to do based on the information you're about to communicate? And obviously the important part here is, what do you want to communicate? So use these pre-attentive attributes in those visualizations to draw attention to those aspects of the message you want to communicate most clearly. The 5th lesson is about thinking like a designer. And the starting point of any good design is that form should follow function. Think about what the entity you're designing, the artifact you're designing, needs to do, and then choose the appropriate form. Now, there are some relevant attributes in good design that apply to any design: affordances, accessibility, and aesthetics. Affordances are elements in design that make it obvious what to do. So if I have some artifact and there's a button on it, I will automatically assume that it should be pushed. If there is a knob, I will automatically assume that it should be turned. A button on an artifact affords pushing, a knob on an artifact affords turning. Accessibility concerns making sure that the visualization or the artifact in general is usable for people with different abilities. And we'll return to this when we discuss data visualization and visual impairment. And the 3rd attribute is aesthetics. Make the visualization as attractive as possible, as there is some evidence that more attractive visualizations are more effective in communicating the message. But in all cases, bear in mind that form should follow function. Don't put aesthetic features on your visualization if they detract from the actual message you want to convey. So, talk a little bit about these affordances in the context of data visualization. And there's kind of 3 important elements here, 2 of which go back to the previous lessons. So highlight the important elements in the visualization. That's lesson 4. Focus your audience's attention and use these pre-attentive attributes. Second point is, do not distract the audience with unnecessary information or features. That's lesson 3. Eliminate clutter. And the 3rd point is, where appropriate, create a clear visual hierarchy to guide your audience through the visualization. And you can do that with drill downs, we'll talk about later on, or animations, which we'll talk about later on as well. But here's an example of what the book means when it talks about clear visual hierarchies. So if you look at this visualization, then I guess first thing that you notice, at least the first thing that I notice, is the title. Ferrari's competitive strategy. It's in a different color, it's larger, and it's bold. The second step, the second element I notice are the axes that were used to create the matrix, market focus and basis for competition. And I noticed them because, yeah, again, they are in a different color. They're a bit smaller than the title, so I don't notice them first, but I noticed them second. The third element I notice are the values on these axes. So for the basis for competition, I see price and differentiation. And for market focus, I see all segments and niche. The reason I notice those is that they have a different orientation than the rest of the material in the matrix. And the fourth element I notice is the Ferrari box. I notice it for two reasons. First of all, it has the unique limited models as an added mark. That mark doesn't occur on any of the other squares in the matrix. And it has Ferrari typed in italics and in a different color. So that's what's meant by visualization, a hierarchy in the visualization. Make sure that the audience's attention is drawn to aspects in the visualization in a very clearly defined order. In this case, title, axes, values of the axes, and then the Ferrari box. So then the final lesson is tell stories. And the point is that stories are typically more effective at communicating a message than conventional rhetoric, like a lecture like this one, because they are not purely intellectual, but they engage emotions as well. So a good story should have an introduction to set the stage and introduce the topic under discussion. So in the story that I told in the previous session is, what are the reasons for the earned income gap by race and ethnicity in Tampa Bay? Sets the stage, introduces the topic. A middle, story should have a middle that engages the audiences by discussing the issue. In my story, well, it's not educational level or field of degree or length of employment. And a good story has an end that concludes the story and typically includes a call to action. So for my story, if it's not educational level or field of degree or length of employment, what is the reason? Could it be structural racism?